The email notification chimed on my phone at 7:43 a.m., and I nearly dropped my coffee mug when I read the subject line. Reconsidering our contract, the Morrison account. My hands actually trembled as I opened it, scanning the polite but devastating words that essentially said they were exploring other options for their multi-million-dollar development project. This was the third client this month to suddenly have concerns about my capability to handle their architectural firm's biggest contracts. I stared at my home office walls, surrounded by 26 years of awards, certifications, and photographs from groundbreaking ceremonies of buildings I'd designed across 3 states. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was questioning my own sanity while sitting in the middle of proof of my professional competence. Something was seriously wrong, and it had nothing to do with my ability to do my job. My name is Margaret Gray. I'm 54 years old, and until 3 months ago, I thought I had the perfect business partnership with my younger brother. Now I'm starting to wonder if I ever really knew him at all. The phone rang, jolting me from my spiral of self-doubt. It was David Gray, my brother and business partner of 12 years, calling from his office on the other side of our shared building. "Maggie, I just heard about Morrison." His voice carried that practiced tone of concern that I was beginning to recognize. "Listen, I know you've been under a lot of stress lately with Mom's situation and everything. Maybe I should take the lead on some of these bigger projects for a while, just until you get back on your feet." There it was again. That phrase. Get back on your feet. As if I'd fallen down somewhere along the way and hadn't noticed. "David, what exactly do you mean by stress? I'm handling Mom's estate just fine, and my work hasn't suffered one bit." "Come on, sis. I've seen you crying in your office. Janet mentioned you seemed overwhelmed when she brought the quarterly reports. It's okay to admit when things are too much." My blood went cold. Janet was our shared assistant, and I had never, not once, cried in my office. Not when Dad died 5 years ago, not when Mom passed 6 months ago, and certainly not over quarterly reports that showed our firm's most profitable year to date. "David, I need to call you back." I hung up and immediately dialed my daughter. Sarah Gray picked up on the second ring, her voice bright despite the early hour. At 28, she'd inherited the family's practical nature and had become my closest confidant since her father and I divorced 3 years ago. "Mom, everything okay? You sound weird." "Sarah, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Have I seemed unstable to you lately? Like I'm having some kind of breakdown?" The silence stretched long enough that I wondered if the call had dropped. Finally, Sarah's voice came back, but now it carried a sharp edge I recognized from her childhood, when someone at school had been unfair to her. "Mom, what the hell? You're the most put-together person I know. You've been handling Grandma's estate like a champion. Your business is thriving. And you just got that award from the State Architecture Board last month. Where is this coming from?" I closed my eyes, feeling both relief and a growing sense of dread. "I think your Uncle David has been telling people I'm having some kind of mental health crisis." "That son of a—" Sarah caught herself. "Mom, that's insane. Why would he do that?" Before I could answer, my office door opened, and my best friend Rita Kowalski walked in, carrying 2 cups of coffee and wearing the expression of someone who had bad news to deliver. Rita had been my friend since college, and she now ran her own marketing firm just 3 blocks away. She had a key to my office for emergencies, and apparently, this qualified. "Margaret, we need to talk." Rita's usually cheerful demeanor was nowhere to be found. She set the coffee down and pulled up the chair across from my desk. "I just came from a networking breakfast at the Chamber of Commerce." My stomach dropped. "Sarah, let me call you back." "Mom, don't you dare hang up on me. Put it on speaker. I did as she asked, and Rita continued. Your brother was there, Margaret. He was talking to Tom Harrison from Harrison Construction, telling him that you've been struggling emotionally since your mother passed, that you've been making mistakes on projects, missing deadlines. He suggested that maybe Tom should work directly with him on the new hospital wing project instead of going through you. The room felt like it was spinning. The hospital wing was my project. I'd spent 4 months developing the preliminary designs, building relationships with the board members, navigating the complex zoning requirements. It was set to be the largest contract of my career. But here's the thing, Rita continued, her voice getting angrier. Tom looked confused. He told David that he'd just spoken with you 2 days ago, and you seemed perfectly professional and on top of every detail. Tom actually defended you, said he couldn't imagine working with anyone else on something so important. Sarah's voice came through the speaker, tight with fury. So Uncle David is basically trying to steal Mom's clients by making them think she's incompetent? I sank back in my chair, pieces clicking into place like a horrifying puzzle. The lost clients, the concerned phone calls, Janet's odd behavior lately when I asked her to schedule meetings. Even the way David had been showing up to client sites I was supposed to handle alone, claiming he was just checking in or providing backup support. Rita, how long do you think this has been going on? She pulled out her phone and scrolled through some notes. I started keeping track after the breakfast, called a few mutual contacts. Margaret, I think this has been happening for at least 2 months, maybe longer. He's been very careful about it, very subtle. He's not outright saying you're incompetent. He's playing the concerned brother angle, suggesting that grief has affected your judgment, that he's trying to protect both you and the clients. My hands were shaking now, but not from fear or self-doubt. I was furious. This was my reputation, built over decades of hard work, being systematically destroyed by the person I trusted most in my professional life. Sarah, I need you to come over here today if you can get away from work. Mom, I'm already in my car, and I'm calling Jake too. Jake was Sarah's boyfriend, but more importantly for this situation, he was also a lawyer who specialized in business partnerships and contracts. No, I said firmly. No, Jake, not yet. This is family business for now. Rita leaned forward, her expression serious. Margaret, what are you thinking? I looked at the awards on my wall, at the photos of buildings that existed because of my vision and expertise, at the business I'd built with my own hands and intelligence. Then I thought about my brother, sitting in his office 50 feet away, probably making another concerned phone call about my fictional mental state to another one of my clients. I'm thinking that David has no idea who he's decided to mess with, and that's when the pattern snapped into place. I stood up and walked to my office window, looking out at the parking lot where David's silver BMW sat next to my car. For 20 years we'd parked side by side, walked into this building together, built something I thought we both believed in. Now I realized I'd been sharing space with someone who saw me as competition to eliminate rather than a partner to respect. Rita, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Of course. Have you noticed anything different about how David treats me in meetings lately? Any small things that seemed off? Rita was quiet for a long moment, and I could see her thinking back through recent interactions. Actually, yes. Last month, when we had that presentation for the Morrison project, he kept interrupting you. Not obvious interruptions, but he'd jump in to clarify things you'd just explained perfectly. And he did this thing where he'd look at the clients with this concerned expression whenever you were talking, like he was worried about what you might say next. The memory hit me like a physical blow. I'd noticed it too, but had dismissed it as David being enthusiastic about the project. Now I could see it for what it really was. A performance designed to make clients question my competence. Mom? Sarah's voice was tight with worry. What are you going to do? I turned back to face them both. Sarah was sitting forward in her chair, her hands clenched together in her lap. Rita had that look she got when she was ready to fight someone's battles for them, which had served our business well over the years, but had also gotten her into trouble a few times. I'm going to do something David isn't expecting, I said slowly, the plan forming even as I spoke. I'm going to start documenting everything. But more than that, I'm going to turn the tables on him. What do you mean? Rita asked. David thinks I'm having a breakdown, right? That grief has made me unreliable and unprofessional. He's been so careful to present himself as the concerned brother trying to protect everyone. I felt a cold smile spread across my face. Well, what if the concerned sister started having some worries about her brother's judgment? Sarah's eyes widened. Mom, you're not going to lie about him the way he's lying about you, are you? No, honey, I'm not going to lie at all. I walked back to my desk and pulled out a folder I'd been avoiding for weeks. I'm going to start paying attention to things I've been overlooking because he's my brother. I opened the folder and spread the contents across my desk. Rita and Sarah both came closer to look. The papers showed a pattern I'd been unconsciously ignoring. Project timelines that David had missed, cost overruns on his jobs, client complaints that had been filed directly with me rather than through our usual channels. I've been covering for him, I realized, saying it out loud for the first time. Whenever David screwed something up, I fixed it quietly because that's what you do for family. I never made a big deal about it, never documented it properly, just handled it and moved on. Rita picked up one of the complaint letters. Margaret, this client is saying David promised them materials we don't even carry, at prices that would put us in the red. And look at this. Sarah held up a project timeline. He told the Hendersons their renovation would take 6 weeks? Mom, you told me yourself that kind of work takes at least 10 weeks, and that's if everything goes perfectly. I sank into my chair, overwhelmed by what I was seeing laid out in front of me. I thought I was being a good sister, keeping things smooth between us, but I was actually enabling him to be sloppy because he knew I'd clean up his mistakes. While he was busy trying to convince everyone you're the unreliable one, Rita said grimly. My phone buzzed with a text message. It was from David. Can you handle the Peterson walkthrough this afternoon? I'm not sure you should be doing those alone anymore, but I'm stuck in meetings. I showed the message to Rita and Sarah. Sarah's mouth fell open. He's doing it right here in writing, she said. He's literally creating a paper trail that makes it look like he's worried about your competence. But he just made a mistake, Rita said, a dangerous glint in her eye. He put it in writing, and he sent it to you, which means you have proof of what he's been doing. I stared at the phone, at David's message, at the papers scattered across my desk. For the first time in months, I felt like I could see clearly. My brother wasn't trying to protect me or the business. He was trying to push me out, probably so he could take full control without having to buy out my share. There's something else, I said quietly. Something I haven't told either of you. Both Rita and Sarah went very still. 3 weeks ago, David asked me if I'd ever thought about retiring early. Said it might be good for my health, give me time to process my grief. He even mentioned that he'd looked into what it would cost to buy out my half of the business. The silence in the room was deafening. Then Sarah spoke, her voice barely controlled. Mom, he's been planning this. But what I discovered in David's office that evening revealed just how deep his betrayal really went. I waited until David left for the day, claiming he had dinner plans. The office felt different in the evening quiet. Shadows stretching across the showroom where Dad used to walk me through inventory counts when I was Sarah's age. Rita had offered to stay, but I needed to do this alone. My hands shook slightly as I used my key to enter David's office. As co-owner, I had every right to be there, but it still felt like crossing a line we'd never come back from. His desk was messier than I'd expected. David always presented himself as organized, but papers were stacked haphazardly, and his computer screen-saver flickered with family photos that now felt like mockery. I started with the most recent files, not even sure what I was looking for. The first folder made my stomach drop. It was labeled Business Transition, Confidential, in David's neat handwriting. Inside were printouts of emails I'd never seen, communications with our accountant about restructuring the business as a sole proprietorship. David had been asking detailed questions about what would happen to our client contracts if one partner became unable to fulfill their duties due to health concerns. There were worse things. Much worse. A draft letter to our insurance company inquiring about coverage gaps if a partner experienced cognitive decline following personal trauma. Notes about which clients might be willing to sign new contracts exclusively with him. Even a rough timeline titled Transition Strategy that started 3 months ago, right after Dad's funeral. My phone rang, making me jump. It was Sarah. "Mom, where are you? You said you'd be home by 7. "I'm still at the office, honey." I found something. My voice sounded hollow in the empty building. What kind of something? I closed my eyes, surrounded by evidence of my brother's betrayal. The kind that changes everything. "Sarah, can you meet me here? And call Rita. I think I'm going to need both of you." 20 minutes later, they were sitting across from David's desk while I spread out the contents of the folder. Rita's expression grew darker with each document, while Sarah's face went through shock, anger, and something that looked like grief. "He's been planning to force you out since before Dad was even buried," Rita said finally. "Look at this timeline," Sarah said, her voice tight. "Mom, he wrote down dates when you seemed emotionally unstable and times when you made poor decisions. But I remember that day in March when you supposedly lost it with a client. You were frustrated because David had given them wrong information, and you were trying to fix it." I picked up another document, this one more recent. "He's been documenting everything, creating a narrative that I'm incompetent. And I've been so focused on holding the family together that I handed him the rope to hang me with." "What's this one?" Rita pointed to a folder I hadn't opened yet. I pulled it toward me, my hands steadier now that the initial shock was wearing off. The tab read, Legal Consultation Notes. Inside were notes from a meeting with a lawyer about removing a business partner who had become unreliable due to personal circumstances. The lawyer had outlined several approaches, including documenting instances of poor judgment, gathering client complaints, and building a case for voluntary departure with reduced compensation. "He actually went to a lawyer," I whispered. Sarah leaned forward, reading over my shoulder. "Mom, look at the date on this. This meeting was 2 weeks ago. While he was telling you he was worried about your health and suggesting you take time off." Rita stood up abruptly, pacing to the window. "Margaret, this isn't just sibling rivalry or concern about the business. This is calculated. He's been systematically undermining you while pretending to care." I thought about all the times in recent months when David had swooped in to help with a client meeting, had suggested I might want to skip a site visit because I seemed tired, had taken over conversations when I was mid-sentence. I'd interpreted it as overprotectiveness. Now I could see it was performance, theater designed to make me look weak in front of people whose opinions mattered. "There's more," I said, opening the last section of the folder. These were copies of emails David had sent to some of our biggest clients, messages I'd never been copied on. Each one followed the same pattern. Expressions of concern about the business during this difficult transition, assurances that he was personally overseeing all projects to ensure quality, and subtle suggestions that they contact him directly with any concerns. Sarah read one aloud. As you know, we've all been affected by Dad's passing, but I want to assure you that I'm committed to maintaining the high standards our clients expect. If you have any concerns about your project or need to discuss anything, please don't hesitate to reach out to me personally. He's been positioning himself as the reliable one while making it sound like you're falling apart, Rita said. I sat back in David's chair, surrounded by the evidence of his betrayal, and felt something shift inside me. The guilt I'd been carrying, the constant second-guessing, the feeling that maybe I really was handling things poorly. It all lifted away, replaced by a cold, clear anger. 32 years, I said quietly. We've been partners for 32 years. We built this business together after Dad retired. I covered for his mistakes. I smoothed over his problems with difficult clients. I worked late to fix his scheduling errors. And this is how he repays that loyalty. What are you going to do? Sarah asked. I looked at my daughter, then at Rita, these two women who had shown me more genuine concern and support in the past few hours than my own brother had in months. Then I looked back at the documents that proved David had been planning to destroy my professional reputation and steal my life's work. I'm going to fight back, I said. But first, there's something else I need to check. I turned to David's computer, still logged in. If he'd been this sloppy with physical documents, what might I find in his email history? What I discovered there would give me everything I needed to turn the tables on my brother's scheme. But it would also reveal just how many people had been watching our family business tear itself apart. The glow from David's computer screen cast harsh shadows across my face as I clicked through his email folders. Sarah moved closer to peer over my shoulder, while Rita continued sorting through the physical documents, creating neat stacks of evidence on the desk. Look at this, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. I'd found a folder labeled Client Communications that I'd never seen before. The emails inside made my stomach clench with a mixture of rage and disbelief. Sarah leaned in, reading the screen. Mom, this one's from 3 weeks ago. Look at the date. The email was to Henderson Construction, one of our oldest clients. David had written, I wanted to reach out personally because I'm concerned about some inconsistencies I've noticed in Margaret's recent project management. She's been struggling since Dad's death, understandably, but I don't want that to impact the quality of your project. I'm taking a more hands-on role to ensure everything stays on track. 3 weeks ago, I repeated, the timeline clicking into place. That was right after I questioned his billing hours on the Morrison account. He wasn't trying to help me. He was already building his case to push me out. Rita looked up from her document sorting. What did Henderson say back? I scrolled down to see the reply. Tom Henderson, whom I'd worked with for over 15 years, had written, Thanks for the heads up, David. I did notice Margaret seemed a bit scattered during our last meeting. I appreciate you keeping an eye on things. Should I be directing future communications to you instead? The words hit me like a physical blow. Tom Henderson, who had trusted me with 3 major projects this year alone, who had recommended us to 4 other construction companies, thought I was scattered. Because David had planted that seed. I wasn't scattered, I said, more to myself than to the others. I remember that meeting perfectly. We went over the timeline revisions, discussed the material delays, and I gave him 3 different solutions for the foundation issue. I was thorough, not scattered. Sarah's hand found my shoulder, squeezing gently. But David told him you were struggling before Henderson even formed his own opinion. I clicked to the next email and the next. The pattern was everywhere, stretching back 2 months. David had contacted nearly every major client we shared, each message carefully crafted to sound concerned rather than opportunistic. Each one designed to erode confidence in my competence while positioning himself as the solution. "This is sick," I said, scrolling through message after message. "Look at this one to Patricia Williams at the Medical Center Project. He actually suggested they might want to consider alternative representation if they were worried about continuity of service." Rita stood up, her face flushed with anger. "That's not concern for family. That's a calculated campaign to steal your clients." I kept reading, my anger building with each email. David had been meticulous, documenting every small moment of normal human behavior, every pause in conversation, every time I'd deferred to his expertise in his areas of strength, and spinning them into evidence of my alleged instability. Here's one where he tells the Riverside Shopping Center people that I've been emotionally volatile and that he's worried about my decision-making capacity. I scrolled down to find the client's response, and they thanked him for his professionalism and discretion in handling a delicate situation. Sarah was reading over my shoulder, her breathing getting faster as she absorbed the scope of David's deception. "Mom, he's been doing this systematically. This isn't just sibling rivalry or grief making him act out. This is a business hostile takeover disguised as family concern." The computer chair creaked as I leaned back, trying to process the magnitude of what I'd discovered. These weren't just emails, they were character assassinations sent to people whose respect I'd spent decades earning. Every client David had contacted now viewed me through the lens of his manufactured narrative of breakdown and incompetence. "I need to see his calendar," I said, clicking over to David's scheduling software. If he's been positioning himself as the reliable contact, he's probably been scheduling meetings without telling me. What I found there was even worse than the emails. David had been meeting with clients individually, scheduling calls during times when I was handling other projects or taking the rare afternoon off. The calendar entries were deliberately vague, labeled things like Henderson check-in and Williams project discussion. But when I cross-referenced them with my own calendar, a clear picture emerged. Every time I was out of the office, he was meeting with our shared clients, I said. Rita and Sarah moved to flank me, both staring at the screen. Every site visit I missed because I was handling another project, every conference call I couldn't attend because of scheduling conflicts, he used as evidence that I was unreliable. Sarah pointed to a calendar entry from last Tuesday. "What's this one?" "Strategic planning session, with no other details." I clicked on the entry, and my blood went cold. The attendee list included 5 of our biggest clients, all meeting together at the same time. This wasn't individual damage control. This was David organizing a group discussion about the future of the business, and I hadn't been invited. He held a meeting with our top clients without me, I said, my voice coming out flat with shock. A strategic planning session about our business, and he didn't even tell me it was happening. Rita was pacing now, her footsteps sharp on the office's hardwood floor. "Margaret, this goes way beyond sibling rivalry or grief-induced bad behavior. This is fraud. He's been misrepresenting the business to clients, making unilateral decisions about client relationships, and undermining your authority while you're still a full partner." I stared at the calendar entry, trying to remember what I'd been doing last Tuesday while David was meeting with 5 of our most important clients to discuss my supposed breakdown. I'd been at home, catching up on project proposals and thinking about how quiet the office had been. How David had suggested I take the day to work from home since I seemed tired. "He sent me home that day," I said quietly. "Told me I looked like I needed rest, that he could handle things at the office." I thought he was being considerate. Sarah's voice was tight with anger. He was clearing the field so he could meet with your clients without you there to defend yourself or correct his version of events. The full scope of David's betrayal was becoming clear, and with it came a realization that changed everything. This wasn't a family problem that could be solved with honest conversation and boundary setting. This was a calculated business attack that threatened not just my partnership with David, but my entire professional reputation and financial future. But as I sat there surrounded by evidence of my brother's systematic campaign against me, I also realized something else. David had made a crucial mistake. In his eagerness to document his narrative and control every detail of his plan, he'd created a paper trail that proved his deception. Every email, every secret meeting, every lie he'd told about my competence was right here in his own records. I turned to look at Rita and Sarah, both of whom were watching me with expressions of fierce loyalty and determination. "I know what I need to do," I said. "But first, I need to find out exactly what David told those clients in that group meeting. Because whatever he promised them, whatever version of the future he painted without me in it, I need to know what I'm up against." I clicked back to David's email, searching for any follow-up messages from last Tuesday's secret meeting. What I found in his sent folder would reveal the full extent of my brother's plan and the timeline he'd set for removing me from the business we'd built together. The follow-up emails painted an even more disturbing picture. I scrolled through message after message, my hands trembling slightly as I read David's careful documentation of what he'd clearly seen as his victory lap. "Listen to this," I said, reading aloud from an email David had sent to himself immediately after the client meeting. "Meeting went better than expected. All 5 clients expressed concerns about Margaret's recent performance and seemed relieved to have continuity assurance. Agreed to transition primary contact responsibilities effective immediately. Margaret's reduced capacity acknowledged by all parties." "Reduced capacity," Sarah repeated, her voice flat with disgust. "He's literally building a case that you're mentally incompetent." Rita had stopped pacing and was leaning against the desk, her jaw clenched. "What else does he say in there?" I clicked to the next email, this one sent to our accountant. "David's asking for a breakdown of all partnership assets and client contract values. He's also requesting information about the legal process for partnership dissolution due to incapacitation of a partner." The room fell silent except for the soft hum of the computer and the distant sounds of traffic outside. I could feel the weight of what we were discovering settling over all of us. This wasn't just betrayal anymore. David had been methodically building a case to force me out of the business entirely. "There's more," I said, scrolling further. "He's been researching buyout clauses and disability provisions in our partnership agreement. Margaret, he sent this email to himself 3 days ago. Partnership Agreement Section 12.3 may provide pathway if medical documentation can be obtained." Sarah moved closer to read over my shoulder. "Medical documentation? What does that mean?" I felt a chill run down my spine as I remembered something. "David suggested I see someone last week. A therapist," he said, "just to help process Dad's death. He even gave me a specific name, said he'd already checked that she was taking new patients." "Oh, hell no!" Rita said, her voice sharp. "He's been setting you up. Get you into therapy, then try to use that as evidence that you're having mental health issues that affect your ability to run the business." The manipulation was so thorough, so calculated, that I almost felt impressed despite my anger. David had thought of everything: the careful documentation, the client meetings, the research into legal loopholes, even trying to get me into therapy that he could later weaponize against me. But as I sat there staring at the screen, I realized that David's thoroughness might also be his downfall. He'd been so meticulous in documenting his plans that he'd created a perfect record of his deception. "Rita?" I said slowly. You said this was fraud earlier. Legally speaking, what exactly do I have here? She was already reaching for her phone, then stopped and looked at me directly instead. Breach of fiduciary duty, misrepresentation to clients, conspiracy to defraud. And that's just what we can prove from these emails. Margaret, this isn't just about your partnership anymore. What David's done could cost him his professional license. I stared at the computer screen, at my brother's careful documentation of his plan to destroy my career and steal the business we'd built together after our father's death. Part of me wanted to feel satisfaction at having caught him, but mostly, I just felt hollow. Sarah placed her hand on my shoulder. What are you thinking? I'm thinking about what Dad would say if he could see this, I said quietly. He always worried about David's ambition, but he never imagined it would go this far. The office felt different now, charged with the knowledge of what David had been planning in this very space while I'd been at home, trusting him to handle things. Every conversation we'd had over the past weeks took on new meaning. Every suggestion, every concern he'd expressed about my well-being, every gentle push toward taking time off, had been part of this larger plan. I clicked through a few more emails, then stopped at one that made my breath catch. It was sent just this morning, before I'd arrived at the office. He's meeting with our biggest client tomorrow, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. The Henderson account. David's going to tell them that I'm stepping back permanently and he'll be taking over all future projects. Rita and Sarah exchanged a look that I couldn't quite read. Margaret, Rita said carefully. What David doesn't know is that you've found all this evidence. He's walking into tomorrow's meeting thinking he still has you fooled, thinking his plan is working perfectly. I stared at the email about the Henderson meeting, understanding exactly what Rita was suggesting. David had spent weeks setting up an elaborate deception, but he'd made one critical error. He'd assumed I would never fight back, never question his version of events, never look behind his careful facade of brotherly concern. Tomorrow's meeting wasn't just David's next move in his plan to force me out. It could be my chance to expose everything he'd been doing. But it would mean confronting not just David, but doing it in front of our most important client, with everything on the line. The weight of the decision pressed down on me like a physical thing. I could feel Rita and Sarah watching me, waiting to see what I would do with this terrible knowledge about David's betrayal. I need to think, I said, pushing back from the computer. The emails seemed to burn on the screen behind me, each one a small knife wound to whatever trust I'd had left in my brother. Sarah leaned forward in her chair. Margaret, I know this is overwhelming, but you can't let him walk into that meeting tomorrow and destroy your relationship with the Henderson account. Once he convinces them you're unfit to handle their projects, getting them back will be nearly impossible. But confronting him in front of clients? I shook my head, my stomach churning at the thought. It feels so unprofessional. Dad built this firm on reputation and trust. What happens to that when our biggest client watches two partners tear each other apart? Rita's expression was thoughtful as she scrolled through more of David's messages. What happens to that reputation when David systematically destroys your credibility and pushes you out? These emails show he's been planning this for months, Margaret. This isn't just about one meeting. I walked to the window overlooking the parking lot where David and I used to race our bikes as kids, while Dad worked late in this same office. Everything felt contaminated now by the knowledge of what my brother had been planning in secret. I keep thinking about last week, I said quietly. When I came in Tuesday morning, and David looked so concerned, asking how I was sleeping, whether I thought I was taking on too much stress. I actually thanked him for caring. The memory made my chest tight, with a mixture of hurt and anger I wasn't sure how to process. How long had David been watching me, cataloging every moment of exhaustion or frustration to use as ammunition in his careful campaign? Sarah stood up and joined me at the window. You know what I think the hardest part is? You're still protecting him. Even now, after seeing all this evidence, you're worried about embarrassing David in front of clients. Her words hit me like a slap because she was absolutely right. Even knowing what David had done, some part of me was still trying to find a way to handle this that wouldn't hurt him too badly. The same instinct that had made me trust his version of events for weeks was still operating. Still trying to preserve some version of the relationship we'd had before I knew the truth. He's my brother, I said, but the words sounded weak even to me. And you're his sister, Rita said from behind the computer. That didn't stop him from planning to destroy your career and steal your clients. I turned back to look at her, and she was holding a printed email with an expression of barely controlled fury. Margaret, you need to see this one. It's from 3 days ago. My hands were shaking slightly as I took the paper. The email was to Marcus Chen, our insurance specialist who handled several major accounts. David was suggesting that my recent instability might pose a liability risk for the firm, and perhaps Marcus should consider which partner would be better suited to handle his sensitive cases going forward. He's not just going after your current clients, I said, the full scope of David's plan finally becoming clear. He's trying to make sure I can't build new relationships either. The calculating nature of it took my breath away. This wasn't a moment of weakness or a single bad decision driven by jealousy or ambition. David had methodically planned to isolate me professionally while maintaining the appearance of being a concerned brother. Every conversation, every gentle suggestion about my health, every offer to handle meetings for me had been part of this larger strategy. Rita was watching my face carefully. Now, do you see why tomorrow's meeting is so important? If you let David present his version of events to the Henderson account, he'll have the template to use with every other client we have. I sank back into my chair, feeling suddenly exhausted. The adrenaline of discovery was wearing off, leaving behind the crushing realization of how completely David had betrayed not just our business partnership, but everything I thought I knew about our relationship as siblings. I don't even know who he is anymore, I said quietly. The David I grew up with, the one who cried at Dad's funeral and promised we'd take care of the business together? That person wouldn't have done this. Sarah sat on the edge of my desk, her voice gentle but firm. Maybe that person was always there, just hidden better. Or maybe the pressure of running the firm changed him. Either way, you can't let sentiment about who David used to be dictate how you handle who he's become. The office felt different now, as if David's deception had changed the very air in the room. I looked around at the space Dad had built, the business he'd trusted us to continue together, and felt a surge of anger that surprised me with its intensity. He's been using Dad's memory against me, I said, the realization hitting me suddenly. Every time he talked about Dad wanting me to take care of myself, every suggestion that Dad wouldn't want me to work myself into the ground, he was manipulating how I thought Dad would want me to handle the situation. Rita nodded grimly. Emotional manipulation is often the most effective kind. David knew exactly which buttons to push to make you doubt yourself. The anger was building now, burning away some of the hurt and confusion. David hadn't just betrayed our partnership. He'd weaponized our father's memory and my grief to make me complicit in my own professional destruction. The sheer coldness of that calculation was breathtaking. So what exactly would confronting him at tomorrow's meeting accomplish? I asked, trying to think strategically instead of emotionally. Sarah and Rita exchanged a look, and I could see they'd been thinking about this exact question. It exposes his lies before he can cement them with our biggest client, Rita said. More importantly, it puts David on the defensive instead of letting him control the narrative. But it's also incredibly risky, Sarah added honestly. If you handle it wrong, you could end up looking exactly as unstable as David's been claiming you are. I stared at the computer screen full of David's carefully documented betrayal, weighing the risks of action against the certainty of what would happen if I did nothing. Tomorrow morning, David would walk into that conference room expecting to deliver the final blow to my credibility, secure in his belief that I was still completely unaware of his deception. The thought of his confidence, his assumption that I would never fight back, sparked something fierce and determined in my chest. David had spent months underestimating me, treating me like a problem to be managed rather than a partner to be respected. Maybe it was time to show him exactly how wrong he'd been about that. But as I reached for my phone to call David's assistant and get myself added to tomorrow's Henderson meeting, Rita grabbed my wrist. "Wait," she said urgently. "Before you make any moves, there's one more thing you need to know about tomorrow's meeting. Something that changes everything." I felt my stomach drop at Rita's tone. After everything we'd already uncovered, what could possibly make this situation worse? "What do you mean?" I asked, though part of me wasn't sure I wanted to hear the answer. Rita pulled up another email thread, this one much shorter. "I found this buried in David's sent folder from last week. He's not just planning to present himself as the stable alternative to you at tomorrow's meeting." She turned the screen toward me, and I read the brief exchange between David and someone at Henderson Industries. My breath caught as I processed the words. "He's proposing to restructure the entire partnership," I whispered, reading aloud. "Suggesting that the Henderson account specifically would benefit from a single point of contact moving forward." Sarah leaned over my shoulder, her voice tight with anger. "He's trying to cut you out of your biggest client entirely. Not just undermine you, but actually remove you from the relationship." The email was clinical in its precision. David had outlined how my recent instability had created uncertainty for Henderson Industries, and how a streamlined approach with him as the primary contact would ensure better service delivery. He'd even suggested that I would remain involved in back-end operations while he handled all client-facing responsibilities. "Back-end operations," I repeated, the phrase tasting bitter. "He wants to make me invisible." Mom had been quiet through this revelation, but now she spoke up with a sharpness I rarely heard from her. "Your father always said David was ambitious, but this goes beyond ambition. This is calculated destruction of your career." I stared at the email, trying to process the full scope of what David had planned. It wasn't just about stealing clients or making me look unstable. He was systematically dismantling my professional identity, relegating me to a supporting role in the business Dad and I had built together. The Henderson meeting isn't just about damage control, I realized aloud. It's about David presenting a fait accompli. He probably expects me to either not show up at all, or to be so rattled that I'll actually agree to step back. Rita nodded grimly. "And if you don't agree, anything you say to defend yourself will just look like the breakdown he's been describing. He's created a perfect trap." The calculated nature of it was almost admirable in its thoroughness. David had spent months laying the groundwork, carefully positioning himself as the concerned partner while systematically undermining my credibility. Tomorrow's meeting was designed to be the final chess move in a game I hadn't even realized I was playing. "So, what are my options?" I asked, looking between the three women who had become my war council. "I can't not show up, because that confirms everything he said about me being unreliable." But if I do show up and confront him, I risk looking exactly as unstable as he claims. Mom reached across and squeezed my hand. There's a third option, sweetheart. You show up, but not to confront David. You show up to present your own vision for the Henderson relationship. What do you mean? David's been playing defense for you without your knowledge, she explained. But what if instead of defending against his narrative, you created a completely different conversation? Sarah's eyes lit up with understanding. You mean go on offense instead of defense? Exactly, Mom said. David's expecting you to either be absent or reactive. He's not prepared for you to walk in with your own agenda. I felt a spark of possibility, but also uncertainty. What kind of agenda? Rita was already pulling up files on her laptop. We have 3 hours before that meeting. 3 hours to put together a presentation that shows Henderson Industries exactly what they'd be losing if they agreed to David's restructuring plan. The idea was both terrifying and exhilarating. Instead of walking into David's trap, I could set my own terms for the conversation. But the risk was enormous. If I failed to pull this off, I wouldn't just be confirming David's narrative about my instability. I'd be doing it in front of our most important client. I need to know something first, I said, looking at Rita. In all those emails and documents you found, was there any evidence that David has actually done anything to harm our work quality? Any indication that his manipulation has affected our deliverables? Rita shook her head. No, if anything, it's the opposite. Your work has remained consistently excellent throughout this entire period. The only instability has been in David's version of events, not in your actual performance. That realization hit me like a revelation. David's entire narrative was built on perception, not reality. He'd been so focused on managing how things looked that he'd created a disconnect between the story he was telling and the actual facts of our partnership. Then that's my advantage, I said, feeling a surge of clarity. David's been fighting a public relations battle while I've been focused on the actual work. Henderson Industries cares about results, not drama. Mom smiled for the first time all evening. Now you sound like your father's daughter. But as I started to feel hopeful about tomorrow's strategy, my phone buzzed with a text message that made my blood run cold. It was from David. Looking forward to tomorrow's meeting with Henderson. Time to put this partnership back on solid ground. The casual confidence in that message told me everything I needed to know about how certain David was of tomorrow's outcome. But there was something else in the timing that made me pause. Rita, I said slowly, what time did David send that restructuring email to Henderson? She checked the timestamp. Last night at 11:47 p.m. I held up my phone, showing them David's text. This message came through at 11:43 p.m., 4 minutes before he sent the email to Henderson. Sarah frowned. Whoa, what does that mean? It means David sent me this message, then immediately wrote to Henderson about restructuring our partnership. He was thinking about me right before he tried to destroy my career. The psychological cruelty of that sequence was staggering, but it also revealed something important about David's state of mind. He wasn't as coldly calculating as his actions suggested. There was emotion driving this, something personal that went beyond simple business ambition. As I stared at that text message, trying to decode what David had really been thinking in that moment, Rita made a discovery that changed everything we thought we knew about his motivations. Oh my God, she whispered, staring at her laptop screen. You need to see this email David sent 3 months ago, the one he never intended anyone to find. What email? I asked, my heart racing as I moved closer to Rita's laptop. Show me. Rita turned the screen toward us, her face pale. It's buried in a folder marked Drafts that I found while looking through the file sharing permissions. David wrote this but never sent it. Mom and Sarah crowded around us as Rita began reading aloud. Subject: I can't do this anymore. Draft saved March 15th, 11:23 p.m. Rita's voice was barely above a whisper as she continued. The email just says, I've been watching you succeed at everything I thought I wanted, and I hate that it doesn't feel like enough anymore. I used to be the one people came to for answers. Now they ask about you first, then remember I exist. I don't know how to compete with someone who doesn't even realize we're competing. The silence in the room was deafening. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. There's more, Rita said quietly. He wrote, every client meeting where they light up talking to you feels like confirmation that I made the wrong choice staying in Dad's shadow. You broke free and built something real. I just inherited a role, and I'm terrified everyone can see the difference. Sarah sank into the nearest chair. Oh my God. This isn't about the business at all, is it? I stared at the screen, trying to process what I was hearing. He never sent this email? Who is it addressed to? Rita scrolled up. It's addressed to you, but look at the timestamp again. March 15th. That's exactly 1 week before he started making those comments to Henderson Industries about your reliability. Mom shook her head slowly. He spent a week wrestling with these feelings, then decided to act on them instead of talking to you. But why? I asked, though even as the words left my mouth, pieces were starting to fall into place. We've always supported each other. When I started the consulting branch, he celebrated it. He said it was brilliant strategy. Maybe he meant it then, Sarah said softly. But feelings change. Success changes things. Rita scrolled down further. There's one more paragraph. He wrote, the worst part is that you'd probably help me figure this out if I asked. But I can't admit to my little sister that I'm failing at the one thing I was supposed to be good at. So instead, I'll probably just find ways to make your success feel smaller, so mine doesn't look so pathetic in comparison. The brutal honesty of that last line took my breath away. David had essentially predicted his own behavior, recognized how destructive it would be, and then followed through with it anyway. He knew exactly what he was doing, I said, feeling a complex mix of anger and sadness. He wrote out his entire plan 3 months ago. Not a plan, Mom corrected gently. A fear. He was afraid he'd become exactly what he ended up becoming. Rita closed the laptop. The question is, what do you do with this information? Do you confront him with it tomorrow? I walked to the window, staring out at the darkness while trying to sort through the emotional chaos in my head. Knowing David's motivation didn't excuse his actions, but it completely changed how I understood them. If I show him this email, he'll know I've been going through his files, I said finally. That could make everything worse. But if you don't address the real issue, Sarah pointed out, even if you win tomorrow's meeting, this will just happen again in some other form. Mom stood up and joined me at the window. Your father used to say that the hardest business decisions weren't about money or strategy. They were about whether to save a relationship or save yourself. What did he usually choose? Both, when he could find a way. Neither, when he couldn't. I turned back to face Rita and Sarah. Is there anything else in those files? Any other emails or documents that might give me more insight into his mindset? Rita reopened the laptop. I can look, but honestly, that draft email explains everything. David's been drowning in insecurity for months, and instead of asking for help, he decided to try pulling you down with him. As Rita began searching through more files, my phone buzzed again. Another message from David. "What does it say?" Sarah asked, noticing my expression. I read the text aloud. "I know you're probably preparing for tomorrow. Just remember, this doesn't have to be a war. We can still find a solution that works for everyone." "The audacity," Mom said quietly. "He creates the crisis, then positions himself as the peacemaker." But something about the timing of this second message bothered me. David had sent 2 texts tonight, and both felt different from his usual communication style. More tentative, almost vulnerable. "Rita," I said suddenly, "check the timestamp on any other recent drafts in David's folder. I have a theory." Rita's fingers flew over the keyboard. After a moment, she looked up with wide eyes. "There's another draft from tonight. Written 20 minutes before he sent you that text message." "What does it say?" Rita's voice was barely audible as she read. "I think I've made a terrible mistake, and I don't know how to fix it without destroying everything we've built together." The silence in the room was deafening as Rita's words hung in the air. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach, but this time, it wasn't from anger or betrayal. It was from recognition. "Read it again," I said quietly, sinking back into my chair. Rita cleared her throat. "I think I've made a terrible mistake, and I don't know how to fix it without destroying everything we've built together." Mom sat down heavily on the couch. "That doesn't sound like the calculating person who's been systematically undermining you for weeks." "No, it doesn't," I agreed, staring at my phone where David's text message still glowed on the screen. "Rita, what time was that draft written?" 9:47 p.m. His text to you was sent at 10:08 p.m. Sarah leaned forward. "So he wrote that draft, then 20 minutes later sent you the message about finding a solution that works for everyone." "He's spiraling," I realized. "Look at the timeline. First the old draft where he's planning his strategy, then tonight's draft where he's admitting he made a mistake, then the text where he's trying to sound reasonable and in control." Rita scrolled through more of the files. "There's something else here." A folder labeled Dad's Notes that was accessed tonight at 9:32 p.m. "Before he wrote the draft about making a mistake," Mom observed. "What's in that folder?" Rita clicked it open and began reading silently, her expression growing more troubled. Finally, she looked up at me. "It's full of your father's business advice to David. Personal notes, emails, recorded transcription of conversations they had." "What kind of advice?" "Your father was coaching him on leadership, on finding his own strengths instead of competing with you." Rita paused, reading more. "There's one note here that says, 'David, your sister's gift is vision and client relationships. Yours is process and team building. The company needs both, but you'll never succeed by trying to be her.'" I felt tears prick my eyes. Dad always said we were stronger together than apart. "There's more," Rita continued, a voice transcription from what looks like one of their last conversations. "Your father told David, 'The worst thing you could do is let fear make you sabotage the partnership you have with your sister.' I've seen too many family businesses destroy themselves that way." Mom's voice was thick with emotion. "David accessed that folder tonight, right before writing that draft about making a terrible mistake." Sarah stood up and began pacing. "So what we're looking at isn't just a power-hungry brother trying to steal clients. We're looking at someone who lost his way, made increasingly bad decisions, and tonight finally realized he was doing exactly what your father warned him against." I picked up my phone and stared at David's message again. "The question is, does that change anything? He still told clients I was having a breakdown. He still tried to undermine my credibility and steal business." But his motivation might not have been what we thought, Mom said gently. Fear makes people do terrible things, even good people. Rita closed the laptop and looked at me seriously. What do you want to do with all this information? You still have that meeting tomorrow with everyone. You could use what we found to completely destroy David's position. Or, Sarah added quietly, you could use it to understand why this happened and maybe find a way to rebuild. I walked back to the window, my mind racing. Everything I thought I knew about this situation had shifted in the last hour. David wasn't a calculating villain. He was a scared, grieving brother who had lost his way and made catastrophically bad choices. The clients still need to know the truth, I said finally. They deserve to understand what really happened and make their own decisions about who to work with. Absolutely, Mom agreed. But how you tell that truth matters. You could destroy David, or you could give him a chance to make this right. My phone buzzed again. Another text from David. What does this one say? Sarah asked. I read it aloud, my voice catching slightly. I keep thinking about what Dad would say if he could see what I've done to our partnership. I don't know if you can ever forgive me, but I want you to know that I know I was wrong. Rita reopened the laptop. He just saved another draft. Do you want to know what it says? I looked around the room at the 3 women who had spent their evening helping me uncover not just evidence of David's betrayal, but the deeper story of his pain and fear. Yes, I said. I need to know everything before I decide how to handle tomorrow. Rita's face went pale as she read the newest draft. Oh no, this changes everything. I held my breath as Rita's eyes moved across the screen, her expression growing increasingly concerned. What does it say? I asked, though part of me wasn't sure I wanted to know. Rita cleared her throat and began reading. I can't keep living with what I've done to my sister. She built something incredible, and I destroyed it because I was scared of being left behind. Tomorrow, she's going to expose everything, and she should. I deserve whatever consequences come from this, but I need her to know that none of this was her fault. She was always the better business partner, the one Dad truly believed in. I was just too proud and too afraid to admit it. The room fell completely silent. Mom's hand went to her throat, and Sarah sank back into her chair. There's more, Rita continued, her voice barely above a whisper. I've been thinking about leaving town after tomorrow's meeting, starting over somewhere else where I can't keep hurting the people I love. Maybe that's what's best for everyone. I felt like the air had been knocked out of me. He's talking about leaving permanently? It sounds like it, Rita said softly, closing the laptop. This isn't just guilt. This is someone who thinks he's destroyed everything beyond repair. Mom stood up and walked over to me. Honey, I know David hurt you badly, but he's still my son, and he's your brother. If he leaves like this, with all this pain between you two, neither of you will ever recover from it. Sarah nodded slowly. Your mom's right. You have every right to be angry, but if David disappears tomorrow, believing he's irredeemably terrible, that's going to haunt you both forever. I slumped against the window, feeling the weight of everything that had happened. But what he did wasn't okay. Telling clients I was having a breakdown, trying to steal business, undermining everything I worked for? How do I just forgive that? You don't have to forgive it, Mom said firmly. But you can understand why it happened and decide whether your relationship with your brother is worth trying to save? Rita packed up her laptop and looked at me seriously. You know what I think? I think tomorrow's meeting needs to be completely different than what you planned. Instead of just exposing David, Maybe you need to tell the whole story. The real story about two siblings who lost their way after their father died. That's a huge risk, I said. Some of those clients might decide they don't want to work with either of us after hearing about all this dysfunction. Sarah stood up and put her hand on my shoulder. But the ones who stay will be working with you for the right reasons. And David will have a chance to take responsibility and try to make things right instead of running away. Mom's eyes were bright with tears. Your father always said that the strongest partnerships are the ones that survive their worst mistakes. He wasn't just talking about business. I picked up my phone and stared at David's messages again. Behind all the professional betrayal and family drama, these were the words of someone who was truly sorry and completely lost. If I do this, I said slowly, if I try to give David a chance to make this right instead of just destroying him, what does that look like? How do I protect myself and the business while still being fair to him? Rita sat back down. You tell the truth to your clients, but you tell it in a way that gives David the opportunity to own his mistakes and commit to doing better. You make it clear that any future partnership depends on him proving he can be trusted again. And you set boundaries, Sarah added. Real ones, with consequences if he crosses them again. Forgiveness doesn't mean going back to the way things were. Mom nodded emphatically. Your father would say that trust has to be rebuilt one decision at a time. David would have to earn his way back into your good graces. I walked over to the couch and sat down, feeling emotionally drained, but also strangely hopeful. I think I know what I need to do tomorrow. It's not going to be easy and it might not work, but I think I have to try. What are you thinking? Sarah asked. I took a deep breath. I'm going to tell our clients exactly what happened, including David's behavior and its impact on the business. But I'm also going to tell them about the bigger picture, about grief and fear and family businesses that lose their way. And then, I'm going to give David the chance to speak for himself and commit to making changes. Rita smiled for the first time all evening. That takes real strength. It would be easier to just burn everything down. Dad always said the easy choice and the right choice are rarely the same thing, I said, finally feeling like I had a path forward. Tomorrow is going to determine whether David and I can find our way back to being partners or whether we need to go our separate ways. But either way, it's going to happen with honesty instead of destruction. Mom hugged me tightly. I'm proud of you. Both for standing up for yourself and for leaving room for your brother to find his way back. As my friends prepared to leave, I realized that this whole terrible situation had taught me something important about the difference between strength and revenge. Tomorrow would tell me everything I needed to know about whether David was ready to do the hard work of rebuilding what he had damaged.